Hello, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another movie review. I haven't done a full-length movie review in a while. First I want to say is that I watched this film 2 weeks ago. I was so excited to watch this film because I've wanted to watch it for literally 20 years. And that's no exaggeration. If you watch the my top 10 movie trailers list that I did a month or two ago, you'll find the Hurricane trailer is second place for me. It's my second favorite trailer of all time because it moves me emotionally anytime that I see it. Not to mention that Bob Dylan song, oh, so good. But, so I watched it and then I took some time to think about how did I want to review it. I was a little out of practice. And then I was just sitting on it. In case you plan on hating anything that I say and you want to click off this video, please know I absolutely love and adored this film. I desperately need to get this on DVD. I know that I'm broke and I have no money, but I need to own this movie. And if you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. This is a 90s gem and it is so relevant right now because not only does this film talk about and depict racism, it especially touches on systemic racism and how the justice system is rigged against black people. Now, this was made in '99 and it is set, you know, a lot of it takes place in the 60s and decades that are not now, but shockingly everything is still relevant to this day. And that is a sad, sad fact. So for that reason, I do highly recommend this. Also, if you whether you are in the US or around the world, if you would like to do something to support and help with the protests and everything that's going on right now in the US and you don't know how, please follow the link on the screen. I also have it posted in the description box. Please click on it. So please go to blacklivesmatters.card.co and there you will find a list of petitions you can sign or funds you can donate to that will really help support people in this time right now. So there is something that you can do. You don't have to sit around feeling absolutely hopeless. So, with that said, I will get into today's review. The Hurricane is a 1999 American biographical sports drama film directed by Norman Jewison with a screenplay by Armyan Bernstein and Dan Gordon. The film follows the life and incarceration of Reuben the Hurricane Carter, a former middleweight boxer who was wrongly convicted for a triple murder in a bar in Paterson, New Jersey. The script to this film was adapted from Carter's autobiography, The 16th Round, from #1 contender to 45472, and the non-fiction book Lazarus and the Hurricane, The Freeing of Reuben the Hurricane Carter, by Sam Chaitin and Terry Swinton. As I said earlier, for 2 decades now I have wanted to see this film. For years the trailer has been one of my favorite trailers ever, as it is still able to move me whenever I see it. Finally, an opportunity came to sit down and watch it, and I was not disappointed. Denzel Washington is one of my favorite actors of all time. You see, while Gary Oldman is my #1 favorite, who I love and adore, I'd be lying if I said he hasn't done a couple of stinkers like Criminal, for example. But Denzel, on the other hand, while I haven't seen every film in his filmography, I can say that of the films I've seen, there has yet to be one I hated or disliked. Maybe one I was disappointed by, like Equalizer 2, but nothing I've been able to call terrible. Denzel Washington is a powerhouse of acting, and this film demonstrates that perfectly. Denzel portrays Carter with such elegant subtlety that it is equally mesmerizing and compelling. He plays Reuben Carter as a man who depicts himself as charismatic. He holds his head up high and walks with pride and confidence, and skimming just below the surface is a layer of anger. Throughout the film, there are moments that show how volatile and close to the surface that anger is. That the tiniest nudge, like a pebble dropping in the water, can break through that calm exterior and release the anger that lurks underneath. This anger speaks to a lifetime of mistreatment, abuse, and having the odds stacked against you, and it takes little effort to bring it out in him. This layer of anger is veiled but present in every scene, and how Denzel shows this is incredible. To add to his performance, as the story moves forward, we see that buried beneath Ruben's anger is a layer of despair in its purest form. He hides it, he does his best to suppress it, but it's the moments when he is presented with hope and kindness, only for it to be taken from him, that we see his despair break through. And as we see it break him, it breaks the viewer in turn. The Hurricane is a powerful story about adversity, good versus evil, society, and moving past our perceptions of others and ourselves. On these matters, the film excels and tells us an incredibly powerful story about one man's lifelong campaign for justice that finally came when he was willing to accept help from those he would have once called his enemies. As I've entered the world of movie reviews, I've learned about the term and story character referred to as the white savior. This wasn't something I was familiar with until it was pointed out to me. Once you see it, it's hard to unsee, as it is a prevalent and unfortunate trope that appears in most films centered around an African American lead. Films such as Hidden Figures or The Blind Side. Now, in some stories, I can understand it because we live in a world where sometimes for a racist to see that their views are wrong, it takes someone of their own race to point it out. But other times, this white savior character is just there to make white people look better in a time when they were anything but, such as Hidden Figures. Specifically, Kevin Costner's bathroom sign scene makes for good cinema, but when you realize why it's there and what narrative it pushes, it suddenly becomes a little more cringy. I say all this because that is not the case at all in this film. Now, there are certainly a group of white Canadians who work tirelessly to help bring Carter to justice, but for two reasons these characters don't classify as white saviors. Reason one, from beginning to end, the savior of Ruben's story is Ruben himself. Throughout the journey of his life, as depicted in the film, he pushes past adversity and he pushes past the boundaries set by society. He decides who and what he'll be, what kind of man he will be, how he will live his life. When outside forces knock him down, he gets back up and he refuses to play by their rules. When he is incarcerated for a triple homicide, he refuses to be treated like a prisoner. While he is in jail, he will not live like a prisoner because to do so is to accept guilt, which he won't do. He creates his own rules and order and lives by that. The events that lead to this freedom were created by him. It is from his act of writing his own autobiography that sets the events in motion. He writes this story not for fame or accolades, but in hopes someone will read it, see his innocence, and help him. And eventually, that's precisely what happens. Ultimately, Carter is his own savior. Reason 2, the white character in this story who helped free Carter were not fabricated. They were authentic and they did help him. And in fact, Carter went on to marry one of them and moved to Canada. But they didn't help him because they were compelled to be heroes. They were touched by how this young African American boy was moved by Carter's story and developed this deep level of compassion and a kindredness that grew and eventually touched them all. As powerful as this story is, the non-linear portrayal of the story in the beginning makes it hard to follow. The story bounces between stages of Carter's life, perhaps in an attempt to stand out from other autobiographical pieces that basically are a story from birth to the present. But the fact this was only done in the very beginning meant it was confusing at times to see what the story wanted to focus on because it was bouncing around quite rapidly. Once it settled down, the story became more engrossing. Now, this story is a biography, not a documentary, and it even admits to changing or fabricating certain characters, which is something you can expect for any biographical film since biographical films started getting made. The writers take an existing story but have to make it captivating for an audience, and for that reason, creative liberties are taken. While I love this film and I shed many tears, I have to wonder if the changes, fabrications, and omissions made about Carter's life helped the film or ultimately hurt it. Based on what I've read about the real story, there were some substantial changes made to promote further the story of good versus evil and this very raw depiction of racism that stems throughout society. The film depicts a boxing match between Reuben Carter and Joey Giardello, claiming the only reason Carter lost the match was due to a panel of racist judges. When the film was released, a still living Giardello actually sued the producers for the false depiction of his fight with Carter, as looking back there seems to be nothing to indicate the loss was racially motivated and was a clean fight with a clear victor. When moving on to depict the moment Reuben and John Artis were arrested, this is another moment altered. In real life, Ruben and Artis were pulled over twice that night, and the first time there was a third person in the car, a man named John Royster, who after the first stop was dropped off at home. I can understand the story leaving him out as he wasn't a predominant fixture of the case, but what I don't approve of is the film depicting John Artis as just a casual friend of Carter's when in fact he was Ruben's cousin. I understand this film is about Ruben, but to ignore the fact that it was himself and another family member who was convicted of this crime and not just some casual acquaintance speaks to how determined the story was to focus solely on Carter. It actually does very little to show his family life, choosing not to mention that he had 2 children or the divorce between him and his wife. Carter is the primary focus and everything else is non-essential, and that doesn't sit well with me. The film was also determined to paint Carter as a saint who, outside of racial mistreatment, had never done anything wrong and was a fine upstanding member of society, which makes for a great film when focusing on good versus evil, but it's not true. The film tells us Carter put himself into the military and came back a disciplined hero. In fact, Carter was discharged from the military after 4 court-martials in the span of a 21-month service. Also, the story of the attack when he was a child and the Lafayette murders were not the only time Carter was in prison. It was also in between these incidents that he was convicted of 3 muggings and served 4 years in prison. Whether he committed these crimes or not, I don't know. It does, however, make the statement in the film about spending 3/4 of his life in prison an accurate statement, at least. As I said, it's a film, so it's not shocking to see facts become work of fiction, because that's how you sell a good film. But if you fabricate or omit so much of someone's life, are you really doing them or the story justice? Detective Della Pesca, played by Dan Hedaya, is portrayed in this film as a hardcore racist with a decades-long vendetta against Carter. The film even goes so far as to heavily imply that the murders were part of a bigger conspiracy to frame Carter for murder, and that was the goal all along. In truth, until the Lafayette murders, Della Pesca and Ruben Carter had never come into contact with each other. But I have to admit, it sure made the story more interesting to see a detective who had it out for a guy since he was a child, all because he was black. It's compelling writing for sure, but I imagine had the real Della Pesca not died before the film's release, he might have also sued for libel just like Giardello did. There were years of retrials and appeals and evidence being overturned and testimonies being changed or thrown out constantly. There is still a large amount of uncertainty behind the events of this case, most of which were not featured in this film. But it's safe to say the investigation itself was not done thoroughly or by the book, and on those grounds, Carter was denied a fair trial, and a large amount of that was a result of prejudice. That can't be denied. The errors and lies and withheld information in the case was already enough for a fantastic story given the overwhelming amount there was, so I wonder why the writers felt the need to go so overboard in telling a false narrative about conspiracy theories and a vendetta spanning decades between 2 men who never knew each other. It makes me wonder, if when biographical films take these liberties for the sake of making an acclaimed film, are they doing the viewer and the characters a disservice? Whatever the answer is, I can't deny that I loved this film. It was powerful, and the messages, whether accurate or not, were driven home, and I don't believe someone can watch this and not see how incredible the performances were, or be moved to tears by the overwhelming emotion of the story. I was so very surprised when I found out just how long a process it was to get him out of prison. This took years, and this film makes it seem like, oh, you know, the white people came along and he was out lickety-split. It wasn't. It was years of retrials and appeals. It went on for so long, and the prosecution was constantly trying to set them back, and there was just so much that was not done correctly. Well, with the original case at the very least. See, when I often watch a film that is based on a true story or a real person, I do love to go and research them and find out a bit about who they really are and what really happened. So that's why I was really surprised that there was so much they chose not to depict, whether it was because it made the story more interesting or they just felt it wasn't relevant. But considering, why would you make the story focusing on it being a conspiracy about just throwing this man in prison to the point where you'd like stage a murder to do that, like you'd kill innocent people just to frame him, because that is very much what the film implies. Like, why would you spend so much time focusing on that when you could focus on the very real aspects of the case, on how long it went on, how much the prosecution did not share evidence, things like that. There are so many things that they really could have gone into, but they really played more into the drama aspect of it than really the biographical parts. And that's the part that really irks me. I'm like, no, I want to know about the real aspects of this, because especially since racism is a very real thing, I feel like it's important to educate people on how the legal system can be altered or manipulated to suit a racist agenda. Because you can't not say it wasn't a racist agenda. He was convicted by his peers, but they were all white people. Like, not a single black person on the juror. Like, that's very rigged. That's just a fact. I think what surprised me so much when I did research and I learned so much about the case was, what surprised me the most is that I 100% believed everything in this film was fact. Even down to the conspiracy, even down to this detective having like a 40-year vendetta just because this kid was black. I 100% believe that, because we're talking about a time in society which apparently has not changed. We're talking about a time where everything about you, if you were black, was based on the color of your skin. People had a preconceived notion of what you were, and it was not accurate. And you had no future because society had already decided that you weren't worth it. So I spent most of this film crying and believing every element of it was true, because even if it isn't true for this person and this story, it's true for somebody else. We have seen these things happen, and when we in 2020 are watching videos of innocent black people being gunned down for jogging, being shot and killed in their own homes, or having the life snuffed out of them by a person who is meant to protect them, then of course, how can I not look at this film and believe everything that it is telling me? Because we have seen throughout history and today that it is real. These things do happen. It's unfortunate that this film chose to add in so much fictional stuff when there was so much that was compelling and fascinating about the real case. But nevertheless, I just can't deny what a freaking fabulous film this is. And I think it's so important for people to watch. I think one of the most impressive things about Carter's story is a man who was the victim of racism his whole life and no doubt grew up to hate and resent white people, and you can't blame him. And he ended up finding a kinship among white people and married one. Like, that is just such a turnaround of just, you know, learning that we don't have to be enemies. I mean, I can't imagine that that's easy for a person who has been mistreated by white people his whole life to then picture them as his allies who will protect him. It's an admirable trait. Anybody who can see past that, even if it's for their own self-gain, it's very admirable. So, yeah, as I keep saying, if you haven't seen this film, oh dear God, please go and watch it. It is mwah! But that is it for today's video. I know this has been long. I do apologize. You know me. When I start talking about a movie, I can't stop myself. I love talking about films. But anyway, thank you as always to my amazing patrons. Your support has been everything to me in these months. Thank you so very much. So that is it. If you have seen the hurricane, please comment down below, share your thoughts on it. I would love to hear from you guys. Please, everybody, take care, and until next time, bye.